Okay, everybody. Good morning, everybody. 9:04, and we'll convene this here workshop.
Member Andrews,
Here. Good morning.
Member Bosler,
Present. Good morning.
Member Countryman,
Online.
Good morning.
Member Debu is absent. Member Griego,
Here.
Secretary Johnson.
And I'm here. Good morning. So I'll see, Chris, if our executive officer has any announcements or introductions to make.
No announcements or introductions this morning. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so the rest of our agenda, we do public comment for items that aren't on the agenda, as always. And then we have two board items, and they're both regulation updates. The first one is for fees, which you all have seen before, and we thought might have been done, but it's back to us one more time. And the second one is for our technical standards, which has also been a long-running project, but for other reasons, and it's just genuinely a heavy lift and really important to get right. And I think we're feeling good about the track that it's on. So we'll hear all about that. And then people can give updates. We'll talk about our upcoming meetings, and we'll be done. Everybody good on the agenda?
Yes.
I'm a little punchy this morning. I haven't been out of the house. Okay. Do we have anybody here in the room who would like to make a public comment for an item that is not on the agenda? Okay. What about online? Do we have any public comment?
None online.
Okay. That brings us to our first item. We have Andrea Buckley and Preston who will be talking about it. Cal Code of Regulations, Title 23, Waters Division 1, Rulemaking Package, Revised Fee Updates. Welcome.
Good morning, Secretary Johnson, members of the board, Andrea Buckley, Deputy Executive Officer. As mentioned, today's workshop is focused on two significant regulatory efforts underway to modernize the board regulations for Title 23. These efforts are at very different stages in the regulatory process, which makes today's workshop a good opportunity to look where both are going and what it takes to get there. Item 5A, the fee update, is nearing the end of the rulemaking process, we hope. And this effort has been before the board several times, has undergone public review, and has now received formal review and comments from the Office of Administrative Law. Item 5B, the technical standard updates, is much earlier in the process. And that effort is intended to modernize the technical standards and definitions that guide the board's regulatory program, reflecting changes in engineering standards, state and federal standards, technologies, and lessons learned through implementation of our regulations. For that item, staff is seeking input early before moving into the formal rulemaking process so we can continue refining the proposed regulations with our board, our partners, and the regulated community. Staff renewed the effort in 2024, and we will be hearing about the early coordination with the Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Water Resources, and our local maintaining agencies. Taken together, these two items reflect a broader effort to keep Title 23 current, clear, and workable while improving how the board carries out its regulatory responsibilities. With that broader context, we'll start with 5A, the revised fee update, where Preston Schott-Bell will be leading us through what remains to complete this rulemaking. Next slide, please. For today's fee update discussion, we'll start with a brief background and recap of the proposed fee changes and the work completed to date. From there, we'll focus on the comments we received from the Office of Administrative Law, and some of those comments resulted in relatively minor corrections and clarifications, while others required more substantive revisions to the regulatory language and an additional 15-day comment period. We'll spend some time explaining those significant changes and what they mean in practical terms for how the board's fees will be updated in the future. And then finally, we'll walk through the remaining regulatory steps and some of the implementation work already underway, including tools intended to provide greater clarity and transparency for our applicants. And the goal today is to make sure the board understands the changes resulting from OAL's review, and the path forward as we bring this revised rulemaking package back for approval next week at the August 28th board meeting. Next slide, please. So as a brief reminder, one of our primary goals of the fee update is to reduce the board's reliance on general fund support to better align regulatory fees with the services being provided. The board first implemented its current regulatory fee structure in 2019, and those fees have not been updated since that time. The existing fees cover a relatively limited set of activities, included permit application review, minor alterations, maintenance concurrences, name changes, and construction and routine inspections. As staff began evaluating the program, we found that the cost for providing these services has continued to increase, while the fees remained essentially unchanged. We also recognized the limitation in the existing approach that permit fees were largely based on the type of encroachment, even though projects in the same category can vary significantly in complexity and the amount of staff time needed to review. That work led to the more refined fee structure, including the factor-based approach for permit application reviews, adjustment of several of the existing fees, removal of routine inspections, and new fees for regulatory activities that were not adequately addressed in the existing structure. The fundamental objectives have remained the same and consistent throughout the process, though. Modernize the fee structure, better align the fees with regulatory service being provided, and reduce reliance on the general fund. So with that background, I will turn the presentation over to Mr. Shotbell to lead us through this item.
Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, board members and Secretary Johnson. My name is Preston Shotbell. I'm the manager of our inspection section, and just picking up where Andrea left off is a really good intro and overview. I'll dive into some of those things a little bit more. So, like Andrea was saying, the new fee structure has that for permit review fees includes a factor-based approach, right? So not every fence that gets permitted is going to have the same fee. It's going to be based on where it is in the system and the amount of risk that it poses, federal review factors, and different things. So we created an equation. It's relatively simple, but to make it as straightforward as possible, we're going to have a calculator online for it, and I'll show you more of that at the end. But for the existing fees, including construction inspection and the minor alteration and minor maintenance concurrences, those are still the same. It doesn't matter the category or type of work being done. If it's considered to be one of those, it's been a straight increase in those fees based on what we found is the real actual work and cost to provide those services. Over time, we've also found that we wanted to that the routine inspection fees was quite onerous, and the program was not quite ready for implementation at this time. And with changing rules with the federal government and what we were seeing in terms of risk in the field for routine inspections for every encroachment out there, and talking with our interested parties on that item, we've removed those routine inspection fees that are currently, or we're proposing to remove the routine inspection fees that are currently in the fee table. But we've expanded into other areas. So for services that do take a lot of staff time, a lot of research and response to the public and anyone requesting them. Those include time variance requests. So if someone's trying to build in the flood season, we are reviewing the weather patterns, we're reviewing stream information, the scope of work they're proposing to do, and getting back to them very quickly to say, yep, you can probably keep going, and we route that through the right level of approval. So that takes time over the season, so there's a fee associated with those. Revision and plans, pretty straightforward. If it's close to what was originally approved by you all at the board or through the executive officer delegation, but there are slight revisions that are in line with that. It still takes a technical review. We're showing to our chief engineer why that still is commensurate with the approval. So there's fees associated with those. And then there's the Sacramento and San Joaquin Drainage District property management actions, which is kind of the overall balloon, saying for all the actions, including lease agreements, temporary access, and other management actions. And then finally, one of the largest changes is fees for system improvement projects. So those longer projects that are aimed at improving the system still take quite an amount of staff involvement, shepherding, processing, reviewing, and coordination over the years of those projects. So we devised a system that is in the regulatory package to reflect some of the costs associated to the board on getting those projects approved and being successful. So that's the overall recap of what the package includes. That is in the briefing package that you have. Next slide, please. Okay, I will not go through every date here, but I did have a lot of bullets here because I wanted to show a lot of the coordination and big milestones that we've hit along this process. It has been a long time. We started this effort initially internally in about 2024, in late 2024. And in January 2025, staff presented the initial fee concepts to a focus group. And then workshops in April and August provided opportunities for those groups to come back and review and give us some meaningful feedback, which really did shape what you have before you today and what we move forward. And this was all prior to the official rulemaking process. We realized the value of engaging at a basic level, human level, and trying to reach out and understand what is going to make sense for both our internal operations and logistics, as well as the regulated community ability to shoulder some of, frankly, the burden that this will be placing on them for these services. But the official rulemaking package began after going to you all in November of 2025 and approving that noticing package. We sent that over to the Office of Administrative Law, and that started the noticing for the public officially to be able to comment officially on the regulation package that went out. Thankfully, that front end work really helped with minimizing the official comments we received during that 45-day public comment period. And we received really minimal feedback at that point because those groups that have been interested in it have already been able to provide their input. And so nothing from the 45-day public comment period substantially changed anything that we finalized and brought to you back in February 2026 to say, all right, we've come back, we haven't received much, we're going to move forward with this package with your approval. And that's what was on the record. Everyone was okay with that. So from there on, we took the approved rulemaking package, sent it over to the Department of Finance, and eventually to OAL. Department of Finance, again, reviews it for the economic impacts of it. And of course, there are economic impacts. So asking in certain ways of what segments of society are affected by it, in what way, private, public, state, and how it relates to other regulations. We received Department of Finance approval. And then we take that signed, approved package that you all signed off on, the Department of Finance was okay with, and got it to the OAL attorney to say, okay, we've gone through the public comment period, here's the package. And then we spoke with the attorney for the Office of Administrative Law, and they really, they're there to make sure that regulation is viable, right? And that we followed the process all along the way, right? So you're showing your work, but they are the experts at knowing that did you really do what you're supposed to, and are the words on paper going to be effective in what you want to do. So we had some really thoughtful and good calls with the OAL attorney about how we're presenting things. Sometimes in the water world, we're speaking certain languages that, regulations are for the public, right? And if the public can't understand it, then what's the point, right? So the comments from that, I'll get into in a minute. We're really thoughtful, and I think we received, really respectful comments. Although we're back here today to do some revisions to it, I think it makes the package stronger, and I think it'll be a better overall product for us moving into the future. So, yeah, and then we'll go into what OAL's comments triggered us being back here today and a new rulemaking package. Next slide. Okay, so as I said before, their feedback included both minor and substantial comments. The minor items included formatting corrections, for example, striking out text that is being removed and underlining text that's being added. There were some parts where the table itself, the rulemaking or the fee schedule, we just put a new one out there and didn't underline anything. So technically, that's not really showing that it's new text. And likewise, the old table that we're proposing to replace, we didn't say like this is going to be gone. So formatting things like that wasn't a huge deal. I think it was pretty understandable, but still, we have to follow the letter of the law for that. And then the substantial comments required some meaningful changes, and we're going to dive into that. And that triggered that additional comment period. What else was there? Sorry. And then some adding clarity to new concepts. So we talk about datums and things like that in the engineering world. Just having some more plain language to get that back to anyone reading it kind of understanding. Okay, this is what the board needs for a set of plans. We want to move towards the national NVGD, National Vertical Geodetic Datum 88, and just describing a little bit what that is without opening up a textbook, things like that we need to correct. Okay, moving forward, please. So the ones that we needed to, I want to bring to your attention today. The primary issue was around how the future fee updates will be conducted. So doing the update here and going through this whole regulatory process obviously is a lot of work for the board to take on. And our idea was that we know that inflation is a thing. We know that costs will generally increase over time. They may not, but we needed we thought a better mechanism to be able to change the fees in the future. And so our original concept was that through public meetings and meeting with you all, we could write into the regulations that the public would have an opportunity to comment and weigh in on your decision or influence your decision whether to increase fees or change them in whatever way. Unfortunately, that does not work for the regulations. I think the statement was we can't regulate our way out of regulating, or we can't just kind of short circuit the process there. So it has to go through and I put APA, the Administrative Procedures Act, and that rulemaking process. Thankfully, we have a solution, but the notable changes from it are for Section 8.1C. Let's see, where'd it go? So again, we had originally proposed that it would be a discretionary action by the board, and after that, with approval, we would be increasing the fees that we put in front of you. Instead, what we're going to change to be is we are tying this to the Consumer Price Index from the Department of Finance's annual price letter. That comes out every year. It's a number they can bank on. The public can find it. It is a publicly available document. There's a number to reference. Instead of saying we may change fees every year, we may do this, it is now going to be a will. We will be referencing that number that comes out every year and tie any fee changes to that Department of Finance consumer price letter consumer price index from their price letter. So it won't be a discretionary action by the board. As I understand, it is a minor update with the regulations, so it will get promulgated through new regulations, but it's not a 45-day public comment period on an annual basis. It's a non-substantial update that is a much quicker process through them. So it'll be more of a procedural process that happens every year. We're happy to obviously bring those updates to the board and keep the public and you all informed that that's happening. But the statements we put into the rulemaking package include when those will happen and that they shall happen every year. So, also, if you recall from this new rulemaking package, we have activity factors that go into the cost of a permit review, and those must also. We thought, well, what if our factors are a little bit off of what we originally thought? We'd like the ability to change those. Unfortunately, we can't do that through a board action. Those also would have to go through rulemaking. So the ability to change those has been taken off of the original package that was noticed and put out. So I think I covered those notable changes. Yes.
When I reviewed this, the second piece, I had like some concerns with that, just because it feels like I remember having a discussion about wanting to have a little bit of flexibility for circumstances where maybe like there's not a lot of work going on, like that we could like actually like reduce the burden on the regulated community. So it feels like this is a little unsatisfying to me that we can't go down like because of like just common sense, right? I mean, because we're not doing work, like, I don't know. What does this practically mean? Like that, I mean, it feels very rigid.
I
realize it's the process and all of that. I'm
Yeah.
just stating but I don't know exactly how it's going to work in practice. But to me, that gave us an opportunity to like make it make sense, which sometimes it may not make sense, you know.
I think if there's, we came at it from a perspective that it's been a pretty consistent, if not increasing, amount of permits and an amount of work that comes across into the board's jurisdiction that we have to analyze and do. So that workload remains consistent. I mean, obviously, our hope is that staffing stays consistent to meet that demand and keep up. So, with that being said, the variable of how much things cost, a billing rate of a staff member, is generally going to be tied closely to an index that would go through with that. Okay.
Sorry, the CPI I was fine with. It's the second change.
Oh, the activity factors
Yeah.
themselves.
No. The CPI is fine. It was the C2 or whatever, yes. Like no adjustment at all to the activity
Oh,
factors.
I see what you're saying. You're right. If federal involvement maybe changes or some standard comes out that obviously makes the workload on a certain encroachment maybe changes. Yeah, I think that we would be ready to do a regulation change for that. And I think we're getting into a point now where our staff is generally more versed in navigating the regulation process, and that would be looped into another fee update, or sorry, a regulation change to change those. So, and again, there could be a possibility that could be a non-substantive change, but it still would go through a rulemaking process to update. So, again, if we change those, we have to show some of that, the economics behind it, and show that the cost is actually way below what that factor is saying. So that is the plan as of right now.
Yeah, on the slide, this will be performed as a non-substantive update. not a full-blown regulatory process. What's the this there? You sending it back for finalization or changing the categories in the future if we need to?
It wouldn't, no, in plain language, it was just talking about the base fee itself. So that $1,000 that exists today, that number would change based on that consumer price index and be promulgated through. So the factors are not a part of that, right? I felt like the previous slide, I was getting too far into it and I zoomed out maybe too much on this slide, but yeah. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. It should be a more straightforward process and have less board involvement, although you know, we'll obviously be informing the board on when that's happening and how that works. So, next slide. Okay, so the plan as we see right now. So today's discussion is exactly that. We're trying to make sure that everyone understands where we're headed. Next week is the board meeting, and you have a staff report and rulemaking package that describes exactly these, and we'll be asking for your approval to go back to move this package forward as it is. So with your approval, we would move forward to first send that revised rulemaking out that we have here out to the interested parties. It is a little bit different from the 45-day noticing period in that Code of Regulations Section 44 or Title I of the California Code of Regulations Section 44 says that it's the folks that commented on it previously, they're the ones that get to have more comments on it. So it's not like the entire rulemaking package from top to bottom is open for debate. It's the things we changed since the last time we went out for comment. Then, of course, it's similar to what we're doing now. We'll incorporate any comments that we received during that 15-day public comment period, and the same sort of kind of branching off from there. If there are substantial changes that we need to really do some revisions that change what this product was, we would come back to you again. If there's no changes or non-substantial changes, we would move to make that final rulemaking package forward to our parent agency, this California Natural Resource Association agency, and the Department of Finance, and then bring that to the OAL office to say, okay, here's all our everyone's looked at this, now it's your turn. And again, go back to their attorney to make sure that it complies with the Administrative Procedures Act. And again, these go into what they do is they say, yes, it complied. We're going to file with the Secretary of State, and that's when it gets put into the Code of Regulations. Typically, those go into effect on the next quarterly basis. We will be also asking for a statement of good cause to show our work, to say we've gone this far. Can we have this go into effect upon filing with the Secretary of State? So that'll be part of that package as well, to hopefully save us a few months before it goes into effect. We realize by saying that we have to be ready to implement those too. So if you can go to the next slide. I'll pause there. Did anyone have any questions on those implementation steps? Okay. So, like I said, we have to be ready for it. So we are working with our website developer to develop a public-facing version of these proposed updates to the fees. It has two parts. One is just the fee schedule itself. I mean, what you see in your packet is a table, and it has all the regulations that you need, but it can be a little daunting for someone to read. So we're trying to put a more straightforward list of what those fees are going to be, to aim at, like Andrea said, better clarity and transparency, so someone can review that without having to go to some other title page and figure that out, and maybe their formatting's different and it just doesn't look very clear. We're listing it on our own website. And the next slide. And then the big part that we tried to get through here too was we were developing a permit fee calculator, right? So whether you're logged in on the permit portal and applying and have a real account or a fake account or whatever, we're going to have that straight on the website as well. So no logins, no nothing. You can click around to say, okay, if I had a project that had X, Y, and Z factors, what would the potential fee be for this? So that's going to be both available on the main website as well as when you're applying for a permit on the portal, it would be there as well. You know, we have an early draft of it. I'm really happy with what I'm seeing so far. You can kind of see on the left side that choose a request. Those are those big categories of fees we have. So they're very distinct type of things. Of course, our staff can help an applicant get into the right category and move there. And then for certain permitted projects, those factors in the middle column would come into play. I think, can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so for instance, with an encroachment permit, there are those factors that we talked about. Okay, is your fence on the water side or land side? Is it on a federal stream or federal levee or not, right? So some of those factors that go in there, and then they can see how it's broken down, kind of more itemized on what overall their fees would be, and kind of prompt them to start an application from there. So I'm happy with the way this is starting. We still have to do a lot of vetting of the math underneath it, but I think the layout is pretty good and achieves our goal of trying to just make this straightforward and show people up front what kind of things they're facing with. So for planning their project. So with that, I think next slide, that brings us to the end. So that's where we are.
Okay, thank you. Comments, questions from board members? Board Member Andrews? Oh, the light's on. Board Member Grego?
I want to thank you for the presentation. I think this is going to be a tool that's going to be such a benefit for the public to be able to access this calculator and kind of get a guesstimate of what's before them.
Right.
So thank you for that presentation. I sit on a local utility district as well, and we're going through this is something I've been used to in local government, whether it's the county or a special district, is these fee structures and how we go through these fee structures and how after 5 years we have a consultant come in and recalculate in order to stay ahead of the curve, making sure that we can meet our obligations at the end of the month. And then we go each year on the CPI increases. And so it's something standard that I've always been working with, but with the state, it's just a little bit different because that's a state, but it is part of our future in regards to trying to keep up with the pace of the work that's before us, is that, we have this objective of trying to have, not have as much reliance on the general fund and try to, make sure that we can cover our expenses and keep our staff and be able to advance the technologies to go further than what we are. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just say a couple things. I don't love the further limiting of flexibility. I understand the CPI rationale. If you had any flexibility, if it was too much, you'd be really depriving the public of a real rulemaking. I might have thought that if it's bounded, it would be okay, but what do I know? The categories though is harder because it seems like I'm sure they have a good reason for it, but it seems like a less good outcome, and I think that's a little bit of a shame, and so I don't love that, but I also don't. I'm not thinking of any better way to do it to suggest to you, so I'll just leave that there. Last thing, do we know why OAL wouldn't have given some of that feedback earlier? It seems like I understand they wouldn't want to review everything twice all the way through, but something like the fee schedule, they probably noticed the first time they looked at it as they were passing it out.
I think it's just the order of
Just the way it
operations
is,
in which it gets to them, right? They don't want to really see it until it's
Yeah.
had X, Y, and Z approvals from different agencies. So
Yeah, I'm sure that's it.
unfortunately, yeah.
Okay, let's go to our audience here. First, in the room and then online to see if anybody has comments or questions, and then we'll bring it back to board members for closing thoughts. Is that no comment in the room? Okay, that's no comment in the room. I thought there might be some comment in the room. Is there any comment online?
None online.
Okay. Any last words from board members here? The last word was wow, and thank you. We'll close this item and appreciate the presentation.
And as a reminder, we do have the staff report for the board meeting and the approvals. If there's questions along the way, feel free to reach out.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. So our second board item here, 5B, is the progress update on rulemaking effort, and this is technical standards for Title 23. And we have, I see two people here, but I thought there were three. Okay, Igor won't be joining them. We have Steve Lamb and Preston Shotbell, and you can take it away in whatever order you like.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. On to the next item. So again, my name is Preston Shotbell. I'm the manager of our inspection section and part of the operations branch of the board. And I'm one piece of a large team to effectuate the regulations we have, the technical regulations in our engineering role at the board. And so I wanted to give a little intro for what we're talking about today. Yigo Liang has spearheaded this effort, and I'm just helping with the voice part of the intro here. So a lot of heavy lifting by Yigo, our consultant, Steve Lamb, and we'll get into some fun technical stuff that we can nerd out on a little bit. So I believe we can move on to the next slide, please. So as an overview and outline of what we're doing here, I have a few slides to provide the background before we get into the details, and I'll talk about the importance of this and status of the California Code of Regulations, Title 23, the key milestones of this rulemaking effort since the current staff took over this task in 2024 that led up to today's workshop, and the reasons that we're proposing to update Title 23 technical standards, and an overview of how extensive this rulemaking effort is. And then I'll hand it over to Steve Lamb, the board permitting section manager, to go into more detail to review the major updates that have been proposed prior to 2024 and key updates between 2024 and today. Again, this has been an ongoing process that I'll get into a little bit of that. And then we'll detail later about the latest draft that was shared with our partner agencies, including U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Water Resources, and LMA representatives in May of this year. And we've since received some extensive comments, and we want to be able to show you where we are in response to those and how we're updating those. We'll dive a little bit into the Corps and LMA representative comments. We did receive comments from DWR. We just haven't had a chance to dig in and give it a thorough discussion today. But just know that we did receive them, and they are, from what we saw so far, they're great comments. We just need to dig into those a little bit more, and we don't have enough time to talk about those today. But Steve will highlight some of the key comments in that section as well. Okay, move forward, please. So again, the board's authority and regulatory procedures and standards are founded on Title 23. We shortly call it Article 8. It's where our technical standards for levee construction, for floodways, and what we base our technical decisions and research upon. that comes out of the California Water Code is our authority there. Since these technical standards were adopted in 1996, they have essentially not really been changed. There have been some updates to other parts of Title 23 over the years. A few of those are shown here. We updated our enforcement process in 2014. As we spoke in the previous item, we introduced the fee schedule in 2019, and then we did another update to show an update to the procedures for administratively revoking a permit when there's no contest from the permittee, and that was in 2023, led by our current staff. And obviously from the previous item, we're currently doing those updates to the fees that were enacted in 2019. All right, next slide. So this slide highlights some of the key milestones that this rulemaking effort has gone through with a focus on the technical standards. It started in 2018, so prior to some of the staff on this in this group were involved with. It was supported by HDR Engineering under a DWR contract, and then it culminated in 2022 with some formal submittal to the Office of Administrative Law, OAL, but it was administratively closed in 2023. It basically timed out in the back and forth with OAL at that time. The Ops branch took over and renewed this effort in 2024 and brought back HDR experts under a newly developed contract with the board. Since then, staff has provided the board with progress updates at 2 workshops, one in August 2024 and February earlier this year. And in May, we sent that draft out to the agencies we talked about before. Let's see. And we've made revisions based on the feedback from both sides. We kind of initially thought that this was going to be a pick it up where we left off and move it forward, but shifting technology, shifting regulations from the federal government, as well as just our ability to understand what we had in front of us, has made this a bigger effort, but I think it's going to be a more effective work product in the end. Next slide, please. So why we're doing this, the main reason we're updating Title 23 technical standards is to bring them in alignment with the latest Army Corps standards, requirements, and guidelines. As the non-federal sponsor responsible for operating and maintaining the Central Valley flood control projects, this alignment with their standards and what we need is essential. It'll streamline how the Corps and board review and approve encroachment applications. In the past, achieving that alignment during the permitting process had depended heavily on coordination among board staff, the Corps, maintaining agencies, and applicants. This approach often placed a significant burden on everyone involved, requiring substantial time to resolve those differences between those standards, and led to inefficiencies in that overall process. But updating the standards through this rulemaking effort is intended to reduce those challenges and improve the permitting process moving forward. Doesn't mean it's going to eliminate coordination and being on the same page and continuing those conversations, but this is codifying some of those differences that we keep running into between the agencies and parties that are involved. We're also updating Title 23 to formally incorporate the state's flood management policy on the urban level of flood protection and urban levee design criteria. These policies will serve as the foundation for many of the proposed technical standards. And again, one of the goals of this rulemaking effort is to make the project the review process more efficient. So we aim to improve how maintenance requests are handled. That's been a discussion with our local partners for a very long time. What constitutes maintenance? What level of approval and what timeline for those approvals need to happen. Those have been talked about over many years with many strong opinions on all sides, and I think we have a decent solution for making that better. We're also adding clarity to certain parts of the regulations and updating all the figures that we have. They're just clearer and define things a little bit better. And just resolving some incorrect references, ensuring those regulations are accurate and just easier to work with. Okay, next slide. So this is an overview of the areas that this update touches. So, quantitatively, an easy way to say that it touches a lot, and why this is taking a bit of time and thoughtful consideration, and help, frankly, from outside experts to get through this. The green colored ones are areas that are no changes or only error corrections. Those are the error corrections are in light green. The blue colored ones involve sections with substantive changes, and bold fonts on Article 2 and Article 8 indicate those most significant consequential changes that Steve will be highlighting. So that's where we're at. Unless there's any questions, I will hand it over to Steve.
Not seeing any questions.
Okay. You're up.
Good morning. Steve Lamb, Central Valley Flood Protection Board Permitting Section Manager. Thank you, Preston. Next slide, please. So here we'll be reflecting on some of the primary goals. Most of this, as Preston pointed out, are updates due to technology, time, process, studies, data, etc. So we're trying to catch up, and after 30 years of some great legacy standards, improve them, make them more user-friendly, and hear those comments. Next slide, please. So here the proposed major updates, as Preston pointed out, are in Article 2, 3, and 8. Article 2 had a substantial update in definitions. So again, definitions, gaining clarity, that's what we want. We want to streamline this process such that petitioners, applicants, the public can understand our jargon, our terminology, and we are the state. We do a lot of different things, acronyms, and those hydraulic or engineered comments do need some clarity. So our hope is that by providing that, it will provide some insight to the rest of the updates and direction. Second is the need for a permit. So as Preston pointed out, the goal for that need for the permit section, the portions that we're looking at are just improvements to streamline the process and really get it out to the public such that it's easy to follow, likening it to our portal. Access that is in terminology that can be understood from the brightest to the unknowing, right? We want to get them in there to comply. Article 8, those were the heavy lift. Those are the technical standards, as Preston pointed out. These were developed prior to my time, prior to Igwo and Preston and myself really getting into it. So we were originally carrying the pail. We were trying to get it over, and with the delay or the suspension of the OAL, now we're carrying it. We're taking ownership of this, and so we all wanted to really read into it, buy into it, and apply what we thought were stumbling points that we've seen from the public. So that's what we'll see in there. The minor updates are the remaining sections, 1, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, because there's 2 separate sections there. That are just, it's gaining conformity. So we added definitions, so we need to gain conformity in other sections to be sure that we have fluidity throughout the document. Next slide, please. While we updated most standards, highlighting 2 areas that we intentionally did not bother to touch. Maybe with a 10-foot pole, but no. They're complicated. They were originally based with studies behind them to provide the guidance which we have today. They do need to be updated. It will be a much heavier lift to do such, and having board guidance on what to do through those processes will be paramount, because they are policy sort of decisions. They are engineered decisions. So that complexity will need to be programmed, vetted to get it off the ground. Additionally, vegetation 131, it has been a little bit, and I'm going to use a pun, prickly, because there's a lot of interest in vegetation, restoration, habitats, coupled with what we as engineers need to do to remove, update, and provide activities of maintenance and things of that nature. So the board is currently working in the background on some work groups for restoration type projects. We're going to be at least touching that portion of the vegetation, but I guess for these two sections, ... to be determined. Next slide, please. So here we'll discuss the sections with the most significant changes, and not all sections, but we've cleaned up a lot of the definition sections by removing outdated terms, defining terms that are heavily used, providing guidance, for example, how we're adding new standards like controlled low-strength materials, and we've defined that. And throughout the document, this is a material that would be used in many places within the standards. Additionally, where did we derive these standards? What is the high bar? What's pushing us into creating these? Like, it's not Preston and Steve and EGWO show. These have a reason. So urban levee design criteria was another one that has been pushed around. DWR developed that ULDC, Urban Levee Design Criteria, which is affecting us here locally with a lot of the SB5 and the levees that are around. So we wanted to make sure that that is new. It needs to be included in the documentation. Additionally, we've called out engineering manuals. And so I think probably the three of us, coupled with all of our agency partners that have reviewed this, have all said, why do we need to put the date behind these engineering manuals when we are citing them as reference? Well, if they update, then we have to do a rule change. We all were like, no, let's not add the date. OAL requires it. They require that a standard be codified and lamented, even if we could choose not to update, not to agree to the latest and greatest. So it codifies us to the one that we made our rules on, which will then, a new update might force us to go through all the definitions and correct terms. So it's a good thing, but it is also a trying thing because it makes us have to continually update. Next slide, please. Others with major changes were levees, erosion control, pipelines, fences, gates, bridges, and water and oil wells. Within those updates, these sections had the most critical. Over the next few slides, I'll walk you through some key changes on these elements. Next slide, please. So speaking of levees, previously we said a term called levee right-of-way, and it's a fictitious line when you're standing in the dirt. We don't know where that is. It's hard to find. It's hard to find for our applicants. So we're still using the levee right-of-way within the document, but we also wanted to put forth a real term. How about 10 feet from the levee toe? So let's put it to something that we can actually, it's tangible, we can touch. Additionally, for local repairs, maybe a repair such as that's on the screen. Yeah, we might physically stand there and think that's big, but with 1,600 miles of levee, that's a small repair. So sourcing soil used to be a big challenge. They would have to borrow areas, increase cost, slow repairs, temporary construction easements, and things of that nature. What we've asked for is look for soil conditions that are similar, and let's do our best to utilize local soils for small repairs and not have to go through an arduous task of getting things done, which any type of delay in a failed situation is a chink in the armor.
I'm actually going to hold it for a second. Apologies.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Additionally, new levees, 3-to-1 side slopes on the land side. And so I underline new with purpose. And as we have had reviewers from other DWR, our flood control partners, they are alarmed at these regulations. And the caveat there is these regulations are formed for new and unauthorized encroachments. All of these standards and regulations, right? We're not asking existing folks who've had pipes in the ground to update to these standards tomorrow, right? That's not the action here. Regulations are set to evolve to keep up with technology for newly constructed. So it's why I underlined it, to give me a clue, but also new. New is the impetus word there. We've also outlined a lot better with our hydraulic impact evaluation procedures, how applicants do that. They're not all engineers who come to us. So that guidance will help other engineers. It'll help practitioners to understand what it is in our expectations. Next slide, please. So for erosion control, formerly our standards allowed for cobblestone and concrete rubble, broken up asphalt, which if any of you have frequented the Delta or some of the upstreams, you'll see a lot of different material. It's not uniform what it is on the picture. And so that lack of uniformity is difficult to maintain. And so we can't see what's under it. We can't see what's behind it. We don't know how it performs. So we wanted to be sure that we included a standard that met both the core and is practical. So we've utilized National Cooperative Highway Research Program this is their sizing of riprap and RSP erosion protection that they've utilized, and it's at a standard. It's been looked at for velocities, and that will it be competent enough to endure flood flows. So that's one of the erosion control. Next slide, please. And so pipelines and conduits, utility lines were probably the biggest lift. There's been, again, a lot of technology move around the subjects of pipes, plastic pipes, different types of couplings and fittings that go along with that. And so the key is inspection and pressure testing with a report to the board every 5 years with exceptions. And so those exceptions, and we're working with our flood control partners as well, is it's really difficult to tell somebody they've got to inspect a brand new pipe that they just put in last year or 5 years ago, when most of these have a life cycle of 30 to 75 years, right? Depending upon, again, the conditions. And so the Corps is requiring pressurized pipes to be pressure tested every 5 to 7 years. So we're, as in our state plan of flood control, we're at a struggle of trying to speak up for our citizens and not have these pressure tests done so frequently with added cost and operation to their facilities, but yet on the other side, we have an obligation through assurance agreements to articulate that the facilities within our levees are competent. So we're taking an approach of when was it built? How has it been operated? Send us some pictures. And so we're going to continue to work with the Corps to get through that inspection side. Something we've never had, probably wish we would have had with the amount of pipes we're seeing decay. Plastic pipes will be available for use within the system, but they need to be coated or encased with a low-strength concrete or controlled low-strength material. We like it from a cost advantage. We like it from a weight advantage. It's easy to get 20, 40, 60, 80 feet of plastic pipe delivered and in and installed versus short segments of heavy concrete pipe or steel. The downside is if we have a fire on the levee, how is that going to happen, right? And some of of course, we wouldn't allow plastic pipe on levees that are burned for maintenance. And if so, how are they going to handle it? But I think it provides an advantage to cost, and we can work with that. Gravity drains will have the same issue. I'm challenged with, this is a core requirement, and we have a little picture on the lower right of the filter pack that would have to be constructed to gain a seepage path, there's mixed feelings on it. Cost of installing, maintenance of it. What happens when it does seep? Is it alarming or is it doing its job, right? And so from an engineering perspective, there's nothing wrong with the concept. It's now how do we implement, regulate, and ensure that the applicants understand what to look for in the field when they see these types of things in operation. We've really taken a deep dive on horizontal boring with a focus mostly on what they call frack out or leaking of drilling fluid. When they're doing horizontal directional drilling, they usually use high pressure fluids to keep the drill moving. Well, when you use high pressure fluids in soil that has the ability to fracture or is sandy, you essentially are creating seepage pathways once that process is done. So you're cracking the cake, and it's a concern. So we want to make sure that everybody who's undertaking these drilling exercises understand the rules and why we're being stringent on such a thing, because I believe that frack out it's a silent killer. We don't know that it's there oftentimes, and without keeping track, we could be in for some trouble if it's not taken care of. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, go back one. Preston's gonna help me out here.
Sorry, just to interrupt on this one a little bit too. I just want to make a point on the top right there where it says, you know, as a default, the inspection every 5 years, but I want to emphasize that there are exceptions, like Steve had said, for the frequency of those inspections based on age, based on a lot of factors. So it doesn't show the text on here about what those exceptions are, but I just want to let people know that that's part of the wording, that there are off-ramps for that default every 5 years. And then finally, the underlined text on the top right, within the levee right-of-way, right? So we regulate not only SPFC, right, federal levees, and the right-of-way associated with those, but also we have regulated streams and designated floodways. So I want to just make clear that those pressure testing requirements are not always required for a pipe going underneath a designated floodway where there's no embankment to be preserved and protected. Generally speaking, for designated floodways and regulated streams, we're concerned more about blockage and things above ground, right? The risk is much less being underneath a designated floodway or regulated stream with no embankments there. There can be exceptions. Of course, there's embankments on some of those streams, and we need to consider that. But I just wanted to point that piece out. So, thanks.
Thank you, President. Next slide, please. So another portion is the fences and gates. New fences shall not be constructed on the levee section except for preventing unauthorized levee access or protecting structures owned or operated by public agencies. So we are in a time of challenge where we are seeing a lot of vandalism, theft of equipment, and most of these facilities located on our levees are paramount. They're pumps, they're things that relieve pressure from our levees. So that was our focus, is how do we make sure that these integral facilities are protected from vandalism or anything poor. New fences on the water side of a levee shall be removable during high water. Of course, where those are wet, we don't want to encourage any obstruction or opportunities for debris piles to have a hydraulic concern. Next slide, please. Bridges and low water crossings. A lot of the elements within here were pretty steadfast. Piles and piers should be avoided where possible within the levees. If you're going to put them within the levees, let's pre-drill them rather than continue to drive them and create vibrations that may crack or fatigue the existing levees around them. Clearance heights for a bridge soffit may be reduced to 2 feet on small streams. And we've dealt with this numerous times. I know some of the board members and I have had coordination on these. And so we've better defined that stream. What is it? It's a watershed of less than a certain acreage that would have low to subnormal flow and doesn't contribute to any real floodway risk. And debris, right? How is debris handled upstream? Are we in a heavily forested area, or are we in the low uplands where there are not very much trees, debris, et cetera, to cause concern? Next slide, please. Additionally, we've taken a look at water and oil and gas wells. Water well setbacks from levee tows has increased from 30 to 60 feet. A permit is required for water wells within 100 feet, possibly out to 300 feet. So again, speaking of the frack out before, as we're drawing down water in any sort of aquifer, there's an opportunity for subsidence, and we want to keep an eye on that such that our levee crowns do not get displaced. And so that is the goal of this. It will also has the potential to induce underseepage, depending upon the draw and the application of the well. So that's the concern, and that's what we're gaming for here. Next slide, please. So the big one, this is the brand new standard, which we haven't had before. It's regarding pools near the landside levee tow. Most of these pools have the potential of, with enough soil and water pressure during a high flow situation, should a pool be maybe a fiberglass, those fiberglass cookie cutter pools as you'll see, or an unreinforced plaster pool, there is the ability to cause buoyancy and push that pool right out of the ground. And so with that, then it would contribute to a larger underseepage concern and could be catastrophic levee failure. So we wanted to look at that and ensure that if pools are being installed, that the proper analysis is taken to validate or verify through or under seepage, and in a manner such that if the pool is installed, it's far enough away that wouldn't cause a geotechnical or seepage impact. Next slide, please. So with that, we've said that pools must be outside the levee right-of-way or away from the levee tow. We've conducted pools that are within a 10-to-1 vertical projection. That's what you see up in the right-hand corner. If you're in that yellow area, it's of concern. If you would be outside of that yellow area, as the diagrams point out, there's limited to no concern because you're not going to have a known impact to the levee. So we may require geotechnical analysis for a pool within 400 feet. We use 400 feet because we want conversation. That's not like you're within 400 feet, you must have a permit. But we needed a barrier to say, when is our interest? What are we doing? Board permit may require pools to remain full. So like I said, an empty pool has the ability to be pushed out, where a full pool at least is allowing for good heavy pressure on the soil and may resist that buoyancy. Board permit may require access so we can ensure if we're doing inspections. Again, I don't see us being pool police, but we do definitely want the ability to in those sensitive areas, to be able to inspect and make sure we're serving the public for safety. We also would ask that folks who do receive a permit for a pool record a covenant on their property, such that that permit document runs with the title of the land title, and new owners have the ability to understand that they've got a permit and these are their responsibilities to keep this pool in this manner. Next slide, please.
Through the chair.
Board Member Grega.
On that subject, you know, when they were developing Plumas Lake, as a land use authority, the Board of Supervisors, they look at the state guidance in regards to how many feet off the toe of that levee as those houses are lined up against those levees. And pools were a concern for me because, you know, they do they do the state limit, you know, on how far they should be away from the toe of the levee. And that's where it lands. But when things change, those pools don't move. Nor does, I mean, I don't know if you're also including septics in there for those that don't have municipal services. They have those wells and they have those septic devices out there. Is that also a consideration when you look at this particular?
Absolutely, and actually we do have another section, septic, tiles, drains,
Okay.
or additional steps. And the one that also applies is retention basins.
Yes.
Oftentimes, we have industrial areas that are putting in earth in. Those are even more concerning, because at least a pool, they're usually full of water just by function, right? And retention basins may or may not be, depends on what's happening. So that's also, we've talked about that. It's in our miscellaneous section, so.
And then with that being said, you look at Sutter County side on Yuba City, where a lot of those historical homes that are up against that levee, and some of them do have pools there. I mean, they're grandfathered in because they've been there forever, but how do they, you know, is there anything that the state's going to look at in regards to those pools possibly being a problem?
I can't say. I think it would depend on what's happening, right? If they were to be removed and then want to reinstall them, then these would be applicable.
Okay.
If there are instances of, cracking or under seepage or such, I would think that if they're older, most of the latest levee improvement projects would have taken those into consideration at the time. Again, that assumption.
Okay, thank you for that.
All right. And so some of the figures were updated. I think this is just, should have been done 100 years ago, right? I mean, you can definitely tell the difference between the two. And it goes back to clarity. We did the best with what we had previously, and this is just outstanding. It's night and day difference, in my opinion. Next slide, please. So the most significant updates. I've touched on a lot of these. I'll try not to regurgitate the same. So this is about the time where we, Preston, Eagle, and I, and the rest of the DWR and Central HDR took off, and we're hitting these. So the maintenance activity definition, the goal of this definition is to allow our LMA partners and those making maintenance actions upon the state plan of flood control facilities, that they can just give us a memo or a document that's saying this is what we're going to do, and here's how it complies with Title 23 standards, and here's how it applies with the O&M. This is our duty through our assurance agreement. We want to go do it. And basically, we have 15 days to turn it around. If we've got concerns, we will voice them. If 15-day passes, go do it. The goal is to keep up on maintenance and not allow anything to become, again, I've used it, chink in the armor. We want to keep our flood system resilient and allow our flood control partners the ability to get out, get on the ground, and get things fixed. Certain maintenance activities may proceed after that notification. My plan is to get those, and if I had the perfect world, same day, go do it, But at least when things get hectic or there's some discussion, we do have a little bit of grace. Elevate only that habitable portion of a dwelling. That's another thing that's come up. So if you're doing a remodel and you're along the Garden Highway, now you're subjected to the 200-foot floodway elevation. So we're not making you raise your whole house, but you want the addition. You're going to have to figure out how to get that above design water surface elevation. It may mean raising your whole second floor, but you have to plan accordingly. So we're not saying no, but plan accordingly and make it comply. We talked about parallel fencing as it's needed, more for security purposes. We've seen some of them in the LMAs who have roadways right adjacent to the levee toe, and they're trying to keep folks off the land side of the levee. So with certain exceptions. Preston hit on the pipe inspections. I spoke about directional drilling and boring. So one of the things we've added is the exit and entry pits for boring operations are oftentimes below the design water surface. And we want to ensure that those boring pits are far enough away from our levees that once they're done and should be adequately compacted, they're sufficient a distance away from the levee toes to, again, not induce under or through seepage. Next slide, please. Go ahead.
Excuse me. Could you go back to that last one briefly? About the maintenance activities and in the first category for encroachments, I'm not sure I'm tracking the must include restoration of the project site to pre-project conditions. I mean, I take it, and maybe examples would help. I mean, I take it it's, fixing a gate or, something that isn't functioning and restoring it to the function, but then restoring the project site to pre-project. What's the project here?
It's really, if you disturb the earth with your tractor to bring the stuff in, make sure you hydroseed it, put it back to the way it is. Don't leave no trace that you were there is the intent. It's not restoration to, if it was broken, don't put it back broken, right? That's not the intent.
So not the whole project site, just the project site that's away from that you use to get access to the part that you're maintaining?
Yeah.
Okay. I imagine it'll be clear to people in context. I just had a hard time as I was reading it, picturing what was happening. Okay, thank you.
It's valid and literal. I get that a lot. So, thank you. The other updates were the controlled low-strength material pipe encasement for pipes in lieu of concrete, which was there previously. So this is a big change. If you have a pipe that's 36-inch in diameter and you fully encase it in concrete 15 feet below, removing that for maintenance is absolutely horrendous. It's a big, giant open hole, lots of jackhammering, and heavy. So utilizing a controlled low-strength material achieves essentially the same or equivalent compaction of the soil that would be around it, and it's easier to dig. It's a little harder, but it's easier to dig than concrete. So we're really happy about that change. Allowing ductile iron pipe through or above the levee crown. So we use a lot of carbon steel pipe running through the levees for irrigation. And carbon steel pipe has a very good strength for typical use, but it has high corrosion probability. So ductile iron pipes are what we generally utilize in civil engineering for underground water services. They have a little bit more resiliency. Of course, soil conditions will dictate. You get high chloride, they will rust. But it's allowing those options. Sometimes working in a small section with ductile iron pipe is a lot easier than getting a welder to do full-on seam carbon steel pipe. So again, this is where that technology really geared in, and how can we continue to move in the direction that's affordable for folks to get things done. As I pointed out before, small streams were defined. Bicycle trails are now multi-use trails, because we were very exclusive in our previous of bicycle trails. Well, they have multiple uses. So whether they're pedestrian trails, bike trails, are that way. And we also, previously, we had a no equestrian on the levees. Great, but we have a lot of our horse communities up in the north around Reading and the Chico area where they want to use them too. And so we're not necessarily allowing them to be on the levees, but at least within our floodways, within those empty branches, come spring and summer, they at least can get down and traverse their horses across the levee and utilize that floodplain. Next slide, please. So I'm going to do a review here of some of the major comments that we received from the Central Valley Flood Control Association, as well as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and our staff. We put it in front of them to get some input. And so, as Preston pointed out, we did receive comments from DWR prior to the during our preparation of this slideshow. So I was unable to include their comments. One of the major comments that was voiced by DWR was to ensure that flood control facilities are not encroachments. That was their nexus. And I think we've done a really good job of differentiating from encroachments and flood control facilities. So the thing there is we don't want to hold our partners for maintenance and action to a higher standard that makes it difficult to get out there and maintain promptly. And so we heard them. We will be addressing those in a later date. But next slide, please. So from there, I just want to give them their plug that we heard you. We're not ignoring you. So of the USACE comments, we had about 30. Here's some of the most significant comments, which was from the Corps: use a levee tow for the setback distance instead of the levee right away. Again, we can physically see that. Refer to engineering manuals without a date. We pointed out OAL doesn't allow that. Plastic pipe may now be encased in CLSM, which instead of concrete, which we appreciate, and require a construction emergency response plan for drilling fluid leaks from borings underneath levees. Next slide, please. Drilling to a certain depth is required for piles and levees. Essentially, like I said, trying to eliminate any vibration, settlement, and cracking. Require pipe inspections out to a minimum of 15 feet beyond the levee toe. That was one of their asks. And it makes sense. If you go a little bit further and it fails, it might have jeopardy. All roots larger than a ½ inch diameter to be removed from the levee. We struggle with this one. That's it's a big challenge to get there, and so we're still analyzing do we want to adopt that? Is it too stringent? If it's the Corps, perhaps this just is for those state plan of flood control Corps levees. We have to use the ½ inch to be in compliance, but it's a little bit of a tough reach. You'll end up taking out a whole levee section to remove a ½ inch root. So it's something we have to consider. And most of the time when we're removing roots on levees, they're probably a levee project. That tree or that vegetation is going to have to be mitigated. So it's applying a cost escalator. So we're at that juncture of public safety and cost. Inspection trench dimensions beneath levees not compliant with the engineering manual. So we're looking back at that trenching requirement, that inspection trench for new levees or newer levees to see how we can apply that. Slurry cutoff wall substitution for inspection trench is not compliant. So those were two. We're looking for options. We're trying to create an ease of this inspection trench to have options when things are challenging or costs are tough. So we're still working with the Corps to revive those, see how we can adopt something that meets in the middle. Next slide, please. So these are from the Central Valley Flood Control Association. They asked for allow fencing on levees to protect permitted facilities like pumps. And like I pointed out before, if this is a flood control association, they're usually either protecting their constituents, our constituents, right, the farmers, or they're trying to protect themselves so they can operate and maintain our facilities. They asked to allow discontinuing piezometer readings. Most of these piezometer readings are placed during levee construction or seepage berm construction to assess performance. Once performance after a year to 2 years has met expectations, they're asking to discontinue reading these. I'm for it. I think if it's working and adapt and working, perhaps we discontinue it and fill these to get another, again, risk out of our flood system. They wanted to allow pile driving near levees, of course, because it's simple. I don't have to drill. And I think I get it, but we need to be cautious about what the soil conditions are and why we would want to allow pile driving near a levee to continue. Again, they asked to refer to the engineering manuals and core manuals without the date, so we don't have to update. I appreciate from both groups of wanting that, but we're bound by the law that doesn't allow it. One of the standards we had was to allow that soils labs must be approved by U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And I think it's a little, it's belt and suspenders, it's good insurance, but I also think it's a little overreaching when you start utilizing specialized labs. Why not just make sure that the labs can specialize to the standard, right? They don't need to be necessarily approved, but show us that a lab can validate to the same standards the Corps is looking at. So we did push back on that. I mean, agreed. Let local rules prevail on non-state plan of flood control levies. Yeah, if they're doing it right, but no, we still want some guidance on there. We want to ensure that we at least have minimum standards on non-SPFC levies such that they're not deficient or under-constructed. Don't require levy to meet all standards when repairing local repairs. Certainly not. There's going to be rationale to it, right? We're going to be pragmatic about how repairs take place. If it worked before but it broke, why did it break and how are we making it better? How are we preventing this issue in the future? Allow HDP pipe to be encased in CSLM or concrete, and we have done so. Next slide, please. Some others were don't require pipe pertinent information to be documented on the field paddles. And this was my initial was let's get the inspection data on the field paddle. So the field paddle looks almost like the roadway markers you may see on the freeway. They might be white and yellow. I think they're almost 8.5 by 11 size sheet of paper where they could physically write on when this was last inspected, when was the last time the valve was operated to make sure it's functional, so we're not trying to break a rusty valve during flood conditions. It made sense. Those get shot at, they get vandalized, they get wiped clean, and sometimes those inspection records may be more lengthy than a field hand could write on the placard. So I liked it because it was right in your face. There was no doubt, but I agree with the statement. Their request was to defer inspections for new pipes until 20 or 30 years. Well, I think some of us might be obliged to agree, but our rules do not allow that. So again, we're going to be speaking with the Corps, trying to figure out how we can stretch out those inspections, right? And see if we can get some grace in not having folks have to do this every 5 years. Allow pipes on the waterside levee slope to be exposed if the LMA agrees. Well, I'm for this so long as the flows, it won't trap flows or create eddies that would cause erosion underneath to the levee, because exposed pipes are easy to see when they leak. And so it's a novel, simple concept if it's applicable. Allow welded steel and HDPE pipes for gravity drains, which we've talked about. Require flap gates on pressurized pipes that are not over the levee crown. They're saying that they don't expect that or don't want that. Again, still in conversation. Allow retaining walls parallel to the levee if supported by engineering analysis. I would think that if we're trying to eliminate parallel retaining walls at as much cost as possible. They are hard to maintain. They're hard to maintain around. I would say if it's for a public project, they would be more easily acceptable than a stepped planter boxes for gardening. Again, not saying that there's a difference in value, but there's a difference in aspect and performance. Next slide, please. So the next steps. We're going to continue to coordinate with commenters to adequately address all these comments, prepare an updated version with comments that have been incorporated. And I failed to mention, these are tentative. We're doing our best to get through this. There might be minor shifts, but at least if we set something in play to aim for, we're striving to get there. Prepare the necessary documents for AOL submission, including the express terms, notice of proposed regulations, statement of reasons, and the economic and fiscal impacts. So that'll be that submission, which Preston talked about for the fees, very similar. And then we'll do the same briefings as the package comes through. Next slide. So with this, as Preston pointed out, the Flood Control Association, the Corps of Engineers, DWR, our partners here at the board and staff, I can't thank you enough, and especially to HDR for helping us do a lot of the lifting. Having Rod Mayer as part of the process has been great for the whole team. So from here, I'll take any questions.
Questions, comments from the board before we go to folks in the room? I see Board Member Griego and then possibly Board Member Countryman after that.
Thank you for the presentation. One of the things I seem to be getting a lot of information on Facebook is all the movement and activity for earthquakes going along California. Is that anywhere on our radar as it relates to our infrastructure for levees? I mean, I know that there's nothing we can do about that, but is it something that we're aware of as it relates to how close it is to the floodplain, the plan, or the flood infrastructure?
I know that we've had some recent shakers, probably in the last year and a half, where we have reached out to LMA partners asking if there has been any damage, anything observed. It's definitely it heightens our inspections or suspicions or concerns. And so Zubair in the deferred encroachment compliance section, he's been a big proponent in reaching out to the LMAs or requesting any, hey, do you guys need anything? Is everything good? So it's more of a check-in, check-on, how are things doing? Are you inspecting, right?
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that because I'm always about emergency preparation and having that kind of movement. And it just seems like it's more frequent than usual. And it's on my radar. So thank you for that.
No problem.
Thank you. Board Member Countryman, do you have something?
Yeah, I have a comment and a question. The comment is, how in the world can the local maintaining agency determine if the roots in the levee are 2 inches in diameter? That seems to be an unbearable burden to try to do something like that. I don't understand it.
So basically, it's when and if there were a tree removed, right? So there might be a down tree or a tree needing to be removed for part of a project. When that tree and root ball is removed, the intent is to chase until you can't see any greater than a 1/2 inch of those roots. Again, your dismay might be equal to mine. It's one of those. Please do your best. Let's get out there. Let's make sure that there is not any area that once it decays. Right. The real concern is if the roots remain from a tree that is no longer living, there is room for that to decay and become a through seepage path. And so that's the goal. That's the impetus behind it. And achieving it is going to have to be the best we can do with our inspectors on site, taking a look and working to comply. But it's a core rule.
Well, I'm sure you remember when we were investigating the Corps. Just a second. How do I block this? Vegetation on levees, and I think the Corps excavated several levee locations and chased roots, and it's a extremely difficult process. But I guess maybe I misinterpreted it. This isn't like a maintenance item. This is when a tree is removed or something like that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
At least that's the way I'm interpreting it, is that, I don't expect x-ray vision. Hey, there's a 1/2 inch root. You got to go get it.
Yeah. Okay, and my question is, in 1986, when they had the big flood on the Feather River, there were major boil locations on the Feather River where the exact location where in 1997 the levee failed. So clearly boils can weaken levees. I mean, we have an actual example. Is there anything in here that, like, after a major flood, if boils are evident, that they need some sort of geotechnical analysis to determine if the levee's safe at that location?
I don't think we have anything quite that specific. I would be pleased to take a look and see even if our conditions or standards that maybe permit conditions would say, should any observed ground, right, boils or soil appear, notify the board immediately or something to that take. But a lot of the LMAs do patrol, right? And so they're trying to be on guard to see that, and it hinges from visibility, right? Do we have enough, is there veg covering where a boil would be? Or accessibility, right? So a lot of the urban levees have fences right at the toe. So it would be hard to physically see anything that's happened.
Well, I'm kind of talking about where we actually had a flood fight at a location and built these chimneys around these boils to reduce the flow through the levee. That's what I'm talking about is, after a major flood fight like that and the levee experienced significant seepage through it, is there anything that would say you need to provide some geotechnical analysis that this levee's still safe?
Yep, Preston just whispered to me. He says it could be part of the PL 8499 repairs or a mechanism for repairs. I will definitely look at it and get back to you, Joe. I don't have a lot of input on usually fight. I deal with the encroachment side, so I'd be pleased to try to provide you an answer at a later date.
It's just hard for me to forget that the 97 levee break was exactly at the location of the 86 flood fight. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you.
Board Member Bosler.
So mine is more of a process question, and I appreciate all of the really hard work that everyone's doing. So the last time we updated these regulations, can you remind me, it's 1996?
Correct.
Yeah.
These regulations.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, before you embarked on this, and maybe this is me being late to the party, but I'm just trying to kind of process all of this. It's a lot. Because it hurts me a bit to be putting so much technical data into like a very rigid regulation. It feels like there has to be a better way to do this. I mean, we do it very differently for roads and bridges and buildings. Like, was there ever any thought about exploring statutory changes that would make this system more flexible, more modern? I mean, technology is changing so much more rapidly than it did in the last 50 years. It just feels very much like a backwards-looking way to do this. And I mean that in the nicest possible way, but like, it feels very rigid. And I don't know that that's going to serve us well. And I don't understand enough about like what I think my simplistic view before today was, oh, the Army Corps of Engineers is making us do all of this, but I don't know if that's true. And so I'd really like to explore that more. And I get that you're on a path and you're going to go to OAL and we're going to do this, and it's probably better than leaving the 1996 there and like everybody just being confused or like, being aligned with the Army Corps of Engineers obviously makes like a lot of sense, but like, is there a way that we can, at the state level, we don't control the feds, we try to influence them. That is what it is, but like, is there some way that we can make it easier for our state process? We don't need to mirror them, like, and there are places that we can be more flexible. I'm just trying to, there's so many other ways that other large infrastructure users like are able to be much more iterative in their updates. And I guess I'd like us to be able to do that too, to the extent that we can. So sorry, that's a lot.
I know that we have had conversations in past of maintaining a continual update. The 30 years without an update is, some could think, is deplorable. But why? Was it working? Maybe. Was it not working? Maybe. So I think even maybe some kudos could also be had to stand for 30 years and navigate through. And so I'm glad that we could at least pick up at this point and move it forward. And I think the process from previous presidents and previous boards have said we need to do this more frequently. There's no reason that it should remain stale like it has. We've missed out on some of the technology and pieces of it. So I think, Keely, from a board member, Bosler, I'm sorry, we are looking at it as statutory as possible, but we're also dealing with an engineered science where we're consistently challenged on specificity. They want the 1 and the 0, how far, how high, precise things we're talking about. And we're also talking about land and materials. So making it verbose, yeah. If there's,
Yeah.
there's
I mean,
nothing more,
I hear
I'd like
you.
to soften
I
it.
hear you. And also, I don't think that it's like that much different. I'd love to hear than bridges and roads and even the building standards. I mean, there's a lot of analogies. There's a lot of very different frameworks that are much more iterative that exist today. And I guess I just don't, I mean, I get that this is the way it's always been done, but it feels very, I mean, there's a reason why we don't update our I mean, we just had a presentation about a feat that was much simpler, and how much staff time has been spent going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth with OAL, like, and I just, these are very, very, very technical, like, things, and putting them in a very, very rigid structure. It's just not, it's not ideal, is my sense. And I'm not a lawyer. I'm not burdened by that. So maybe I'm being too simplistic, but I guess I'm registering. I feel like there's a reason why we haven't updated them in 30 years. It's a huge undertaking. Kudos to all of the staff time and work that people are putting in. And also, what's going to happen when things change next year and 2 years from now? Like, do we have, maybe there's even a statutory process to like streamline that with OAL? Like, I don't know, I mean, I would like to open our aperture on process a little bit here and just think about how we can make it more flexible and not be burdensome to the regulated community and really like try and work with them and really be much more risk-based, because we're never going to have enough money to do all the things to make it perfect. So how do we really focus on what we need to make sure we can avoid catastrophe?
I'm going to have a suggestion on that. We'll come here for a response, and then Board Member Grego has had her hand up. Do you want to get that quick, or?
Just, yeah, real quick, the way that I've viewed it, and I have not been my main promulgator of these, I've been on the team, but having a little bit of distance from some of the nitty-gritty on this, and literally sitting next to Steve, seeing all the decisions he has to make on a day-by-day basis to get our applicants where they need to be, so that you have a complete package in front of you, and hopefully we've made your jobs easier and you feel confident in what we've gotten to you. I think the way I see it, yes, I can't invent another, like, we can't invent another code or another, like, maybe there's another framework hiding somewhere that we can navigate and make that more efficient. But what I'm seeing with these, through all those details, is that there were things that were really lacking in terms of what we get questions asked, and if we just had it in the code, we can go, look, right here, don't ask me any more questions, go do it. And it allows my inspectors to be able to hold firm on that, as opposed to being sort of in some sort of gray area, literally out on a site to make a decision. And then second, the challenge is making it flexible enough to allow for that in engineering judgment on, like, that doesn't apply here, or here's the off ramp, and we all agree that we're on the same page for that. I think that's what we've been struggling with, and that slows things down from a technical review standpoint. So that's what the value I'm seeing of this update happening, in addition to the technology and things that we've seen over time, and grabbing the new things from the Corps, their latest technical memo just dropped. Let's, what does that have to say for this, and how do we agree with it, or how do we implement it? That's the update for this. But yes, the process is rough, and I wish, trust me, I wish there was an easier way to get those codified. Maybe cities and counties have a quicker way to put new standards in there, but the value there is to.
It's actually the state. The state does building standards. The state does.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's not local governments, but I think there are other state systems that we should think about.
Sure. So we should look into that as well. So, but that's the value I see from my perspective for it.
Board Member Grego.
Yeah, I just want to share some information based on what Board Member Countryman made in regards to, what happened in my backyard in '86 and '97. As it relates to boils, it's really kind of a different experience all the time. We train people to go out and look for those types of things on high water events, but the boil on 97, it was actually underneath a house that was up against the levee. And it wasn't caught until the conservation crews were out there working, trying to sandbag, that they saw that there was water being released out of that levee underneath a house. So boils can occur up to a half a mile away from the levee toe. So we have a lot of open orchards out there, and we know that. And so the local levee districts, they go out and start looking for things like that to see if those boils are releasing clear water or dirty water, based on, what the reaction is going to be. So it's not always like textbooks where it would be right there at the toe of the levee that we would experience something like that. It's actually has a variety of places where it can turn up. And so that education component with local levee districts, sharing with people who are volunteering to be walking levees or along the levee route to look for things like that is really, really important. So I just wanted to share that experience because it was noted in '86. It occurred, a levee failure in '97. The Corps of Engineers was scheduled to do repairs along that levee stretch that summer. Unfortunately, it broke before that ever occurred. So there you go. And then I'm going to save my comments in regards to Keeley for board comments because I want to share some information about what I had an opportunity to visit, and part of our staff was there yesterday on an issue in Yuba County, and just to share that experience. I'll save it to board comments, though.
Board Member Andrews.
I don't know whether I should save comments for the board meeting next week or speak to them today, but I don't know how much of the rewrite team will be present in a week. And I just want to say the amount of effort that has gone into this major rewrite is extraordinary. And the thing that has served us so well, and we are so lucky, is that we've had a consistent team working on it since before I retired as a consultant, because I had the opportunity to work with that team in an administrative role when the prior version was submitted to OAL some years ago. That team had to pick up where the prior team left off without adequate documentation. They had to start largely from scratch and go through the entirety of these regs. And after the decades that had passed, it was very beneficial to go through the entirety of the regs and create consistency where there had been none. Things would pop up, long after we thought they had been dealt with. It's like, it's not consistent with this other piece. And in particular, Rod Mayer has been an extraordinary force in doing the recrafting in a way that makes this a sensible whole. I would love it if we could figure out some ways to streamline things, but I do think just the fact that we've gone through so much of it is going to make it a smaller lift the next time we have to pick this up and make some changes. And I want to thank the luck that we have had in having a consistent team, because you cannot expect that.
Right.
And thank Rod for his persistence and continuing attention to all the details that were involved in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a comment coming, following up on Board Member Bosler, but I'm still thinking it over, so I'm going to hold mine until after the public comments. Does our board counsel have something to say?
Do a board council. This is not, I just wanted to, not a board comment, but Board Member Andrews mentioned Rod Mayer. I just wanted to make the board aware that Rod was actually responsible for the regs back in 1996. So to the point Board Member Andrews is making in terms of consistency and having that history, and again, when we started back, I think, when 2018, and had to basically start from whole cloth all over again, it was really helpful to have Rod's memory, why things were the way they were back then, and then bringing things up to date as well.
Thank you. Let's have comment here from folks in the audience first, and then we'll go online, and then we'll bring it back to the board for any final words. Please state your name for the record.
Good morning, Megan Nagy, Vice President of the Central Valley Flood Control Association. I know I said I wasn't going to talk today, but you know me. So first, I'd just like to thank your staff and Rod for including us in the development of these. We've had a lot of engagement. It's always good conversation. They listen. They don't always agree, but we've felt very a part of this, and so I just want to thank you for that. And especially, one of the most important provisions in this update is the separation of the definition of maintenance from maintaining an encroachment versus maintaining the levee. That is huge. That is a critical change to these regulations and will make a huge difference in just making us able to maintain easier, right? So thank you for that. Keely, I'm not a lawyer either, but your wish I love. So hopefully Jeet can figure out how to. So, and then to some of Joe's comments, the half a root diameter, hopefully you respond to the core as comment noted. I can't even imagine what that would take, even if it's one down tree, and the amount of environmental and cultural impact that would have to increase the cost. Like, I can't even fathom what that would be. So hopefully that's comment noted to the core and we move on. And then the geotech analysis Joe just brought up. As a levee maintainer, I totally agree with you that repeated boils are a concern for us every year. We have locations that we know. I'm lucky to have the best maintenance crew there is. And so my guys know exactly where to look every year. We know where they come up. They know that in about 5 days after the water comes up is when we start to seep. We're not super worried the first 3 days because we don't ever see it. Like, they know. That's the first time. The second time the water comes up, it's faster and faster and faster. And so we can see it every time. We know that. Our guys go out and see it. But adding a burden of extra geotechnical analysis without what to do with that information just causes an increased cost to local maintaining agencies. And I'll give you an example. We had a location that we had a boil in 2023. We requested PL 8499 assistance. It was in a similar location it was upstream of a site that we had in 2017 where the Corps approved PL 8499 and made a repair. In 2023, they denied our request. And when we asked why, they said, well, the levee didn't fail. Okay. So, all right. And so we appealed, and then we appealed again, and then we appealed again. And we were denied 3 times by the Corps for various reasons each time. But bottom line is, we know these are issues. I don't need to even do the borings to know this is an issue. But there's nothing on the back end to help us. And these aren't repairs a local maintaining agency can just take on themselves. So that's a different problem that's kind of outside these standards, but I just ask that we try not to put something in the system that there's no solution to on the back end. I think that's it. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other comments in the room? Come on up.
Good morning. My name's Rodney Mayer, and first I'd like to thank you for the kind comments. I appreciate it. And it's been my pleasure. I work with HDR Engineering and formerly with DWR and the board. And it's been my pleasure to work on these standards this time for the last, I don't know, about 8 years. I consider it maybe a twice in a lifetime opportunity to work through these. I heard some comments from board members that I wanted to respond to. Member Griego asked about seismic concerns being addressed. The update to the standards would incorporate the urban levee design criteria, which for urban areas specifically addresses seismic concerns. And so I think other than the urban areas, it's a little bit loose and risky, but for the urban areas at least, I think there's some solid requirements that are in the ULDC with respect to that. And Member Bosler asked about not being so rigid with the standards. And we tried to, as Preston pointed out, we tried to be flexible and balance that with clarity so that people know what they're getting into. And I think that's true throughout, but also there's a possibility, I think, in the standards, the way we've written them at this point, that for non-state plan of flood control levees, where the Army Corps isn't going to have to approve the work, there's the ability to provide waivers to the standards where they make sense. So there's a lot of flexibility for that and for delta levees as well, because they have separate standards. And Member Countryman asked about the half-inch roots and finding them, and of course that makes no sense. The current standards simply say when you remove a tree, you need to dig out the roots that are larger than 1.5 inches out to 3 feet beyond the trunk, and that's the end of it, which is very reasonable and manageable. Going much beyond that becomes very burdensome. And we intend to not change that rule, at least in this process, because that's part of the vegetation policy. And he also commented about the cumulative damage that occurs from repeated events causing boils, and that's a well-known fact that as the fine material is lost from boils and seepage water carrying it away, it becomes much easier for the next event to cause a boil. and they get worse and worse. And I was very disappointed to hear that the Corps was rejecting repair of boil damage recently for, I guess it's RD 108. But in 1997, we went through this, we had a major flood, lots of boils and seepage damage, and we had quite a lengthy discussion with the Corps and a lot of pushback, numerous meetings, but ultimately they agreed to recognize that boils are causing damage and they should be rehabilitated. And they constructed many seepage berms to handle the boil damage. I don't know what the current thinking is, but at least that's how we dealt with it 20 years ago. Thanks again.
Any more comments in the room? Okay, we'll go online. I believe we have at least one, Mark List, and we'll see if we have others. Put your hand up. Go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Mark List, DWR, Division of Flood Operations and the Flood Maintenance and Operations Branch. Like Megan, I wasn't necessarily going to speak, but it's hard for me not to, sorry. I do want to commend the board staff and consultant team on really great work to date. Comments, I think we still need to be a bit more clear on O&M of authorized SPFC facilities versus improvements as well. Perhaps even including some explicit exemptions in the Title 23 regulations that spell that out. I'm a bit concerned about the levee right-of-way discussion because I have sections of levee, Puda Creek as an example, that has no SSJDD property rights beyond the levee toe. If the regulations say things about 10 feet and 10 feet doesn't actually exist, or 15 feet and 15 feet doesn't actually exist, we are already running into a problem of how a maintainer, most maintainers can't acquire additional SSJDD rights on SSJDD behalf. The state doesn't necessarily have funding or the wherewithal to pull that off where the existing condition does not meet that standard. But it's just an issue. And then wells and septic are fairly major concern for me near the levee because I'm thinking about an existing property that maybe only has 50 or 60 feet from the levee out to the adjacent roadway. Someone has a well, private well, and a septic system, and it has to be rehabilitated. The well, maybe it has, casing's gone bad. They need to over drill and reinstall. They may not have 60 feet to put it in with there's also setback requirements for septic from wells for environmental health hazard. So I think you have to give yourself an off ramp so the executive officer of the board can give you the ability to do something slightly different than what the regs say, because once it's written and that's your requirement, you may make a person's property uneconomic. They can't replace their well or septic. Overall, I think we're moving in the right direction with these. And my staff, myself, are more than happy to sit down with Ego and team to make sure that our concerns are worked through with this process. I think that's all I have at the moment. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other comments online?
No more comments online.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the board. I'll start with my observation from Board Member Bosler. My reaction to that, I agree, and I was thinking about that as I read through the package, and I'm old enough now to have history as a lawyer. That's my other disability, I guess. Of writing things that we thought were really good at the time, and then turned out, times changed, or there's something we didn't anticipate, and wanted to change it, and it was harder than we thought. So I really get that, and I was thinking while you were talking that the waivers are probably the main way that we do that for permits anyway, and how we've been able to get 30 years past the old ones when they were obviously out of date. And so and that's not a terrible system. I think having a pretty flexible waiver provision is a good idea in general. It allows us as decision makers or executive officer to take responsibility for something, and based on the real information and get the right answer. I would want to make sure that it's set up in a way that it works. Even when waivers work, sometimes it's a lot harder for staff to get there, or for the applicant to get there than it might be. I know this from working with other agencies where people are busy and they know that getting a waiver requires like extra memos and stuff up the chain, and so it doesn't happen for a while. And I don't think that's what happens here, because you all are. But I would think about whether the waiver provisions get you there for things like changing technology or changing understanding about something. And then the other one that I might suggest, I don't know how it would work, but I've seen in other places where standards will have like an alternative performance-based standard, and it'll say, do these things, or something with the equivalent performance, and I don't know exactly how that would work in ours, but I wonder if sometimes, that might be an option as well to maintain flexibility. Okay, other board comments? Questions?
Are we under board comments now?
We're still on 5B until we're not. But we might be at that point pretty soon. Anybody else on this, the regulatory standards? Okay. With that, we are off of 5B, and we're on to board comments, and I'm going to go to Board Member Griego.
Thank you. Just a couple of things to report out. I had the opportunity on Wednesday to listen in. DWR did a presentation for the plan, and they invited tribal governments to participate in their comments and understanding of where the plan was at and how it's evolving. So it was wonderful to hear it. The presentation was great, and the interaction between tribal governments and the presenters was well done. And so thank you for that opportunity to be able to be a part of that. Yesterday, I had the opportunity, Supervisor Messick at Yuba County invited a group to come out to the Hallwood community. Some of us have been out there to the Hallwood area, so you're familiar with that area being designated as a floodway. He invited two of our staff, which was Chris Leaf and Steve Lamb, along with Congressman Thompson, Congressman Gallagher. There was also Yuba County CEO Kevin Mallon, along with community development leadership there. And so the issue is, and we've talked about this issue a lot, is the 408 permit. We had the Colonel McTighe there, along with his staff. Did I leave anybody else out? I think that included everybody. But I was really impressed with the interaction that we had in regards to the 408 permit and how it relates to that floodway. Everybody was there for problem solving. We sat in the middle of a street in a cul-de-sac in Hallwood and really hammered out some solutions to the problems that are there. And the problem is part of that floodway was elevated high enough to be taken out of the 408 process. And looking at the rest of the area and how do we work through that problem. Supervisor Messick offered up as a solution to maybe the county taking an overlay of that area and doing the cultural, the cultural work that needed to be done in that area, as well as the hydraulics and elevation in there, and being a part of a solution. And the Colonel grabbed onto that along with the Congressman Thompson, and kind of had a little side meeting of how do we work through these problems. And so I think that when we look at these types of interactions, that we not only solve Hallwood's problem, but these problems probably are in other areas, not only in California, but throughout the country, and offering up maybe a pilot project to see how how it works. You know, if local government takes a part of being the solution here and does this type of mapping where they look at a certain area and they, instead of each homeowner having to go through this process, they just take an overlay of a certain area and try to resolve this issue. I just want to thank our staff. I think our staff was there, very impressive. They were problem solvers there, and it was noticed by everybody in the county and then also from the congressional. So in regards to Keely's comments, you know, I've always been a strong supporter of advocating for our federal legislature. You know, a lot of times they're not totally in tune or aware that these are problems that can be solved, but sometimes they take action from them in order to raise the level of our concern to the Secretary of the, you know, the Corps or whoever, you know, that needs to be, these problems need to be heard by. And so I'm encouraged when I saw what I saw yesterday, and I'm really excited to see how this thing all pans out. So again, advocacy from this board on the issues that are important in our communities here, I think we make a very strong argument for a lot of the things that are going on, and when we can get in front of the you know, the Congress or whoever on the federal level, I think we can make a very good impression and story about why we need to change some of these regulations and be more consistent. And just one last thing is that with the Colonel, I really felt like he was a problem solver in himself, and he saw the value of, you know, standing in the middle of that road trying to resolve some issues out there. So I'm really encouraged to work with him on that level. Thank you.
That's great to hear. Thank you. Other board updates from folks here? Not seeing any. Just briefly, I've had a chance to sit in on some of the meetings about floodplain development, including technical work happening, how the climate change inputs are evolving, and what that means for other things. And it's we're getting to the interesting time of the process where people are starting to be able to think about what it means for them and how to react and how to get it all done in a way that makes sense. And I think there will be we're going to be hearing about that in future meetings, but I think there'll be an opportunity for board members to help with the you know, communication relationship part of it, and making sure that the cooperation goes the way that it wants to. The DWR outreach team last time, you know, was also great. I expect them to be, you know, this time as well. But I think that'll be a place where we should focus and can really help. And for me, I may take on a task, or at least offer to work with the teams and write some explainers and try to translate things from the way that it'll show up in a technical PowerPoint for people who do it for a living, to people who may be watching and wondering what it means for them. It's the kind of thing I used to do in previous jobs, and I see a need for it here. We have a tendency to do, the whole community have a tendency to do really good work that our constituents don't understand. And, you know, that becomes a problem for funding and response and everything else. Okay. Last thing here, upcoming meetings. We have, you know, they're listed in your agenda. Board meeting next week, coordinating committee September 21, board meeting September 25, board workshop October 9th. We also have an advisory committee meeting next week, next Tuesday. And I'll turn here to Chris to see if there's anything you want to say about any of those meetings that we should know.
The workshop in October is going to be up in Bakersfield, so be ready for that. Nothing, not Bakersfield, I'm sorry. You'll be counting Marysville. I don't know what I was thinking there. But yeah, it's not here in Sacramento. But nothing in next Friday will be there'll be more actions than we usually have because we're doing everything that we were supposed to do last month. So it'll maybe a little bit longer.
Okay, good to know. And with that, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody, for coming. We're done.